He was a man who fought every war, not for power, not for victory, but to break a cycle that the world itself could not escape. They called him a traitor. They called him a savior. But when the world was reborn, he discovered the truth. He had lived this life before. Every choice, every battle, every death was part of a plan older than time. Now, standing at the edge of creation, the general must decide, will he save humanity or finally end it? Because in the war between man and destiny, only one can survive. The night was silent, yet the earth trembled beneath the march of boots. The city of Ashbourne lay in ruins, its skyline devoured by smoke and flame. Amid the wreckage stood General Elias Kael, a man once hailed as a protector of nations. Now, his name was whispered with both reverence and fear. Rain fell over his shoulders, tracing the scars that war had carved into his skin. His uniform, once a symbol of honor, was soaked with blood and dirt. Before him stretched the Valley of the Fallen, thousands of men who had followed his command without question. He had promised them victory. He had given them a grave instead. The radio on his belt crackled, voices of his council demanding surrender. They spoke of alliances broken, treaties betrayed, and a world that had turned its back on him. But Elias remained still, his eyes locked on the distant horizon where lightning struck the mountains. He had seen too much to trust in words any longer. He remembered the last order he had refused to obey, an order that would have wiped out an entire province in the name of peace. He had stood before the council chambers, 12 men in suits, their hands clean, their hearts hollow. He had said, "A soldier's duty is not to destroy what is left of humanity." They had called him a traitor. Now they hunted him across continents, sending armies to silence his defiance. But Elias had not fled. He had chosen to fight, not for power, not for vengeance, but for the silent ones, the forgotten souls buried under the cost of obedience. The night deepened, and thunder rolled like the drums of an ancient war. A flicker of firelight glowed ahead. His last camp, hidden beneath the skeletal remains of a cathedral. He stepped inside. A dozen weary soldiers rose to greet him, their faces hollow with exhaustion and hope. "General," one whispered, "the enemy surrounds us from the east. They will attack by dawn." Elias removed his gloves slowly, placing them on the altar where stained glass fragments shimmered faintly in the candlelight. He looked at the faces before him, men and women who had lost everything yet still chose to stand beside him. Their eyes carried a question he could not answer. Were they fighting for redemption, or for a dream that no longer existed? He turned toward the cracked statue of an angel that overlooked the hall. Its wings were broken, its face scarred by fire, yet it still stood. Something in its stillness spoke to him. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of iron and ash. Elias reached for his rifle and whispered, not to his soldiers, but to himself, "If the world calls this rebellion, then let it be. But I will not bow to a lie." A distant explosion shook the earth. The candle flames wavered. Somewhere beyond the hills, the enemy was coming. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. Elias stepped out into the rain once more, his eyes steady, his heart neither afraid nor at peace. He had chosen his side. In the darkness, lightning revealed the outlines of approaching forces. Hundreds of them, armored and relentless. And yet, Elias stood unmoving, a lone figure against the storm. The world had turned its guns upon him. But as the first sound of battle echoed across the valley, the general who defied the world did not retreat. He only whispered one command: "Hold the line." The rain fell harder, washing the blood from the stones. And in that relentless storm, history prepared to remember or to forget him forever. The ground quivered beneath the thunder of artillery. Each detonation painted the night sky in violent flashes of red and white. The storm and the war became one, wind, rain, and fire blending into a single merciless symphony. General Elias Kael moved through the chaos like a man who had already accepted his fate. His coat fluttered against the wind, heavy with rain and the burden of memory. Every command he gave was clear, measured, calm, a calm born not of peace, but of knowing there was no turning back. The soldiers held the barricades as best they could. The cathedral walls shuddered under the assault, stained glass shattering into 1,000 shards of dying light. Smoke choked the air, but Elias's voice still cut through it, steady and unyielding. He was not leading an army anymore. He was leading the last fragments of a belief that once meant something. Bullets struck the statues and pillars beside him. He ducked behind a crumbling wall, reloading with a trembling hand. A young soldier fell at his feet, whispering his name. Elias knelt beside him, pressing a hand against the boy's wound. The blood was hot and fast. The boy smiled faintly, his lips trembling. "Did we hold the line, General?" Elias could not answer. He watched the boy's eyes fade into stillness, then close them with his own shaking hand. For a brief moment, he forgot the sound of war. He heard only the rain tapping against the stones, soft as if the world itself was mourning. From a far ridge came a voice over the loudspeakers, his former commander, General Voss, once his friend, now the man sent to destroy him. "Elias Kael, lay down your arms. The world no longer recognizes your command. Surrender, and your men will be spared." Elias stood, water streaming down his face, his eyes cold as iron. He looked toward the voice echoing through the valley. Then he raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the dark, the sound answering like thunder. No surrender. The enemy's advance began in full force. Elias's soldiers fought from the ruins, from trenches carved out of broken marble and bones. Every shot was defiance. Every breath was a vow that they would not vanish quietly. Hours passed like minutes. The night tore itself apart. And when dawn began to crawl over the blood-soaked field, the rain stopped. What replaced it was worse, the silence of aftermath. Bodies lay scattered like fallen leaves, the ground steaming with the warmth of spent lives. Elias stood amidst it all, his weapon empty, his uniform torn, his hands raw and trembling. Only a handful of his soldiers remained. Some knelt in prayer. Some simply stared at nothing, lost between life and death. The sun rose, pale and merciless, over what was once a world of men. From the distant ridge, the enemy banners were still visible, though motionless. They had stopped their advance. It was not victory. It was hesitation. No one knew why. Elias looked toward the east and saw something moving through the mist. A convoy, black vehicles bearing no flag, no insignia, not soldiers. Something else. Something that did not belong to any nation. His lieutenant, a woman with a bandaged arm, stepped beside him. "Who are they, sir?" Elias did not answer. He stared as the convoy approached, slow and deliberate, the engines humming like a funeral dirge. He could feel it, a presence that chilled even the air. Whoever they were, they had not come to fight. They had come to collect. One of the vehicles stopped at the edge of the ruins. A figure stepped out, tall, calm, dressed not in military garb but in gray civilian attire. The man's eyes met Elias's across the field. There was no hatred in them, only understanding, a kind of grim respect. He raised a hand in greeting, or perhaps in judgment, and though no word was spoken, Elias knew this meeting had been inevitable since the day he refused that final order. The wind shifted. Ashes lifted into the light. Somewhere a bell rang, its tone haunting, distant, as if calling from another time. The soldiers turned toward it, uncertain whether it was real. Elias took one step forward, then another. The figure in gray did the same. Between them lay the battlefield, a graveyard of every oath ever broken. Neither man spoke. Neither man lowered his gaze. Something was about to change, not only for them, but for the world that had abandoned them both. And then, as the light of morning spread across the shattered earth, the sound of distant engines grew louder again. But this time, they came not from the east, but from the west. Every soldier froze. Elias turned slowly toward the rising dust. Another army was approaching, bearing no colors, answering to no nation. And for the first time, even Elias could not tell whether they were coming as saviors or executioners. The wind carried the scent of oil and fire. A flock of crows rose from the valley, screaming into the sky. The figure in gray looked at him one last time before retreating into the mist. Elias Kael stood alone, the world closing in from both sides. The war was not over. It was only waking up again. The sky dimmed once more, turning the light of morning into a bruised shade of gray. The world seemed to hold its breath as two forces advanced, one from the east, one from the west, both hidden behind veils of dust and smoke. General Elias Kael stood at the center of the dying field, a single man between two storms. The wind pressed against his coat, carrying the faint echo of boots, engines, and something else. Music, perhaps, or the whisper of an ancient chant rising from far beyond the mountains. His soldiers waited in silence, staring at him as if his heartbeat alone decided their fate. They were broken, starved, but still alive, still waiting for his word. The figure in gray had vanished, leaving no sign except the deep tire tracks carved into the mud. Elias's gaze followed them until they disappeared into the mist, and for the first time in years, doubt flickered across his face. Not fear, something deeper. The quiet recognition that the war he'd been fighting might not have been his own at all. He turned toward his lieutenant. "How many left?" 17, sir," she answered. "No more." 17. He let the number rest in his mind. Once he had commanded legions, 10,000 voices obeying a single call. Now, 17 remained. And yet, he felt a strange calm settle over him, as if the truth could only be carried by those who had already lost everything. The sound of engines from the west grew louder. Shapes emerged through the mist, massive, armored, but not like any machines Elias had seen before. They moved with mechanical precision, their surfaces glinting like polished bone. No banners, no signals, no faces, only silence and purpose. His lieutenant lifted a rifle, but Elias raised a hand. "No," he said. "Wait." The machines halted at the edge of the field. A single hatch opened. From within, a group of figures stepped out, unarmed, wearing white coats that contrasted sharply with the smoke-stained world around them. Their faces were covered by glass masks, and each bore a small emblem over the heart, a circle divided by a single black line. One of them spoke, voice amplified through the mask. "General Elias Kael, you are to come with us." Elias's soldiers reacted instantly, raising their weapons, spreading into defensive formation. The tension cut through the air like a drawn blade. "By whose order?" Elias asked, his voice steady, though his eyes never left the nearest figure. "The order of those who still seek to end this war," the masked voice replied. "You have seen what others were not meant to see. You have broken the silence." Elias frowned. "And what silence is that?" The figure tilted its head slightly. "The one that built your war." The words hung between them like a wound that refused to close. Elias stepped forward. The masked men did not move. The soldiers behind him shifted uneasily. They had survived too much to be fooled by talk of peace. "You came through the fire," Elias said, his voice low, "not to end the war, but to erase the ones who remember it." For the first time, the voice in the mask faltered. "You do not understand, General. The world is not as it was told to you. The nations, the commands, even your rebellion. It was part of a cycle, one that you disrupted." A flash of lightning cracked across the sky, splitting the clouds apart. Rain began to fall again, colder this time, sharper, as if the heavens themselves had turned to glass. Elias took another step forward. "Then tell me," he said, "what happens when a man breaks the cycle?" The figure in white hesitated, then lowered its head. "The world starts again, but never the same." Behind them, the distant army from the east advanced closer, their banners cutting through the fog like jagged blades. Two forces, both claiming justice, both ready to erase the other. And between them stood Elias Kael, caught in the narrow space where truth could still survive. The lieutenant whispered behind him, "Sir, they are surrounding us." Elias did not turn. His eyes were fixed on the masked figures. He could sense it, something hidden behind their words, behind their arrival, something that had been waiting for him long before the war ever began. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered notebook, the same one he had carried since the beginning of the rebellion. He opened it, revealing pages filled with maps, coded messages, and fragments of orders that no one was ever meant to read. He tore a single page from it and let the wind take it. The paper danced into the storm, carried toward the mountains. Whatever truth it held was gone now, beyond reach, beyond control. The masked figure stepped forward. You cannot stop what has already begun. Elias looked toward the east, where the enemy army's lights glimmered like dying stars. Then toward the west, where the white figure stood in silence, waiting for him to surrender. He raised his voice just enough for both sides to hear. Then I will not stop it. I will change it. The wind roared through the valley. The soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, eyes wide with something between terror and belief. The masked figures exchanged glances. Even the machines behind them seemed to hesitate. Then came a sound, low, distant, growing like the pulse of the earth itself. The ground began to tremble, not from artillery, but from something deeper, older. The mountains to the north flickered with light, lines of blue fire crawling across their peaks, spreading like veins beneath the rock. Every face turned toward it. The rain froze in the air for a heartbeat. Even the wind seemed to stop. And in that single, suspended moment, Elias Kael whispered something no one else could hear. Not a command, not a prayer, just a name. Then the mountains answered. A blinding wave of light burst on the horizon, swallowing the sky, the soldiers, and the silence all at once. When it faded, nothing moved. No sound, no rain, only the echo of something vast and waiting, as if the world itself was holding its breath before revealing what came next. When the light receded, it left behind a silence that did not belong to the earth. The rain had stopped mid-fall, the air suspended between what was and what could never be again. Smoke coiled upward from the torn soil, rising like lost souls escaping from the battlefield. Elias Kael opened his eyes to find the world changed. The valley that had been soaked in blood was now washed clean, but not by rain, by something radiant and otherworldly. The bodies of the soldiers were gone, the machines from the west had vanished, and even the eastern banners had dissolved into mist. The only thing that remained was the faint blue glow that still bled from the mountains. His breathing was slow, measured, as if each breath might disturb the fragile balance holding the world together. He felt the weight of the rifle in his hand, though he could not remember lifting it. The metal was warm, almost alive. He dropped it, and it sank into the soft earth with a quiet sigh. A voice broke the silence, not from behind him, not from ahead, but from everywhere at once. You are still standing. Elias turned, searching for the source. Nothing. The sky was empty, yet the voice lingered in the air like an echo of thought itself. Who speaks? He demanded, his tone neither fear nor anger, but something between. You defied your world, the voice said, and now your world has defied you. He took a step forward, boots sinking into the pale mud. The glow from the mountains pulsed faintly, as if answering the words. What have you done? He asked. No, the voice replied softly. What have you unleashed? Elias looked around. The field stretched endless now, horizon devoured by fog. The ruins of the cathedral were gone. In its place stood a blackened archway carved from stone that shimmered faintly with veins of light. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He walked toward it, each step slow, heavy with something that felt like recognition. He had seen this place before, but only in dreams or perhaps in memories that did not belong to him. As he approached, he noticed movement on the other side of the arch. Silhouettes, figures that looked human but were not. Their outlines flickered, dissolving between solid and shadow. They stood motionless, watching him. Elias stopped a few paces short of the arch. His voice was low, controlled. What is this? One of the figures stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was the same as the one that had echoed through the air moments ago. This is what remains when men mistake obedience for purpose. Elias's jaw tightened. I fought to end that mistake. Did you? The figure asked. Or did you only fight to prove that your rebellion mattered? For the first time, Elias felt something beneath his composure, something like the slow turning of realization. He looked down at his hands, the veins faintly glowing under his skin with the same light that came from the mountains. The figure continued. You opened the way. The cycle is broken. But when a cycle breaks, what do you think rises in its place? Behind him, faint footsteps began to echo. He turned sharply, rifle half raised, though he had dropped it minutes ago. A shadow approached from the mist, his lieutenant. Her face was pale, eyes wide, uniform torn but untouched by blood. "Sir," she whispered, "where's everyone?" Elias looked at her, but he could not answer, because for the first time he realized something terrible. The air around her shimmered faintly, just like the figures beyond the arch. Her outline flickered. She was fading, becoming part of whatever world had been born from the light. Her lips trembled. "Did we win?" Elias wanted to tell her yes, but the word would not form. He saw her reaching out for him, fingers trembling, and when they met his hand, he felt nothing, no warmth, no weight, only the faint hum of energy, like touching a dying star. Then she was gone, swallowed by the silence that devoured everything else. Elias stood alone once more. He looked at the arch, at the figures waiting beyond it. He felt the pulse of the earth through his boots, the strange rhythm beating in sync with his own heart. The voice spoke again. "The world you knew has ended, General, but not because it was destroyed, because it was rewritten." Elias looked toward the mountains, where the blue veins now stretched across the entire horizon. Each pulse grew brighter, closer, as if something immense was awakening beneath the crust of the earth. He took one slow step toward the archway, then another. The air shimmered, thickening with light. "You do not belong here anymore," the voice whispered. "Step forward, and you may see what lies beyond defiance." Elias stopped at the threshold. Behind him, the last fragments of the battlefield began to fade, the mud, the smoke, the broken world he had known. Before him, the figure stood still, waiting, patient as stone. He took a deep breath, eyes steady. "Then I will see it." The instant he crossed the threshold, the ground split open. A roar surged through the air, not fire or thunder, but a memory itself unraveling. Images flashed. His soldiers laughing, his city burning, his child at home under sunlight, the council chamber where he had refused the order. And then something else, an image he had never seen, yet knew too well. A vast structure beneath the mountains. Machines turning. Men in gray watching from behind glass walls. And a single voice saying, "Activate the next cycle." Elias fell to his knees as the vision consumed him. The light grew unbearable, flooding every sense until there was nothing but white. When his sight returned, he was standing on solid ground again. The sky above him was no longer gray, but pale gold. The valley had vanished. In its place stretched a new world, untouched, silent, waiting to be named. And in the distance, a familiar sound rose, the echo of marching boots. Steady, coordinated, like the rhythm of a past refusing to stay buried. Elias turned toward it, his expression unreadable. The light behind him still pulsed through his veins, but his hand reached instinctively for the weapon that was no longer there. He waited. The sound grew louder, closer. But when the first silhouette emerged from the haze, it was not a soldier. It was a child, barefoot, eyes glowing faintly with the same light as his own. She looked up at him, her voice calm, unafraid. "They are coming, General." Elias stared past her into the horizon, where shapes began to move again. Thousands of them, not quite human, not quite machine. Something was returning, something that should never have awakened. The wind began to rise, carrying with it the faint echo of the same command that once started the first war. And as Elias listened, his face hardened, not with fear, but with a quiet understanding that the cycle had not ended at all. It had only begun under a different name. The air trembled again, subtle at first, like the low hum before a storm. Elias stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the child had pointed. The sound of movement grew clearer now, a tide of footsteps, not heavy like soldiers, but rhythmic, deliberate, as if the earth itself were walking toward him. The child remained still beside him, her small frame untouched by the wind that had begun to howl through the empty valley. Her pale eyes caught the faint reflection of the distant light, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "They have been waiting for you." Elias looked down at her, confusion flickering behind the calm armor of his expression. "Waiting?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. Since before the first war, since before men forgot who made them fight. The ground cracked beneath his feet. The earth split open like a wound, glowing with that same blue fire that crawled from the mountains. From the fissures rose shapes, neither flesh nor metal, but something between. Their bodies shimmer with light, their faces hidden beneath smooth, mirror-like surfaces that reflected everything except themselves. Elias's breath caught, though he did not step back. They stood in perfect silence, forming a line that stretched beyond sight, their movements slow, fluid, unnatural. They bowed their heads slightly in unison, and the same voice that had spoken before echoed once more, not from any one of them, but from all of them together. General Elias Kael, you have broken what was never meant to end. Elias clenched his fists. And what was that? The lie, the voice replied. The illusion of choice. Lightning fractured the clouds above, revealing the mountains in full for the first time. They were not mountains at all, but colossal machines buried beneath stone, awakening, their surfaces cracking open like shells. Blue veins pulsed across their sides, lighting up the heavens in electric veins that reached toward the stars. Elias felt the vibration under his boots, a living heartbeat spreading through the soil. The child beside him stepped forward, her gaze locked on the awakening giants. This was the beginning, she said softly, and you have brought it back. He turned to her sharply. Were you? She looked at him then, not like a child at all, but like something far older, something that had seen every version of the world rise and fall. Her voice was no longer human. I am a memory of what you destroyed. The figures surrounding them began to hum, a deep, resonant tone that rippled through the valley. The air thickened, light twisting, bending, reshaping everything it touched. And then Elias saw it, across the distance, through the distortion of time itself. The city, Ashbourne, whole again, its towers unbroken, its people alive. But it was not the same Ashbourne he remembered. The banners were different. The soldiers wore insignias that had never existed. And above it all, carved into the steel of the tallest spire, was a single emblem. The same divided circle worn by the masked men. The voice continued, surrounding him. Every rebellion is part of the design. Every hero becomes another cog. You defied the world only to rebuild it in its image. Elias shook his head, his breath heavy. No, I fought to free it. And yet, the voice said, it is still in chains. Only now, you're the one holding them. The child turned to face him fully. Her eyes were glowing brighter now, almost blinding. Do you remember the day they gave you your first command? She asked. Elias froze. He did, too clearly. The council chamber. The smell of iron and ink. The 12 men in gray. But as the memory replayed, something changed. He was no longer in the room. He was watching from above, as if through glass. He saw himself sitting at the table, nodding, accepting the role of general. But in the reflection behind the glass, he saw the same figure in gray who had come to him at the battlefield. And behind that figure, hundreds more, identical, watching, recording. The realization struck like a blade. It was never his choice. It had never been anyone's. The hum grew louder. The figures stepped closer. You broke the illusion, General, the voice said. But a broken world must still be led. Elias's hand instinctively went to his chest, feeling for his insignia, but was gone. In its place was the same symbol, the divided circle, glowing faintly beneath his skin, the mark of those who had controlled the cycle. No, he whispered, I am not one of you. But the voice replied, calm and final, you always were. The child raised her hand. The air around them shifted, bending into spirals of light and shadow. In an instant, the valley changed again, no longer ash and ruin, but alive. The sky was blue, the wind soft, the air filled with the sound of laughter and life. A new city stood where the battlefield once was. People walked its streets, smiling, unaware of the world that had been before. Elias looked down at his hands, clean, unscarred, his uniform restored, shining. He stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Soldiers saluted below, and carved into every wall, every gate, every flag, was the same divided circle. A woman approached him, her voice gentle, familiar. General Kael, the council awaits your orders. He turned to face her, but it was a lieutenant, alive, smiling. As if nothing had ever happened. Elias stepped back, his throat dry. "What is this?" She tilted her head. "The peace you fought for, sir. You made it possible." Her words were soft, but beneath them he heard the same hum as before, faint and mechanical. He looked past her into the horizon and saw it again. The mountains, still pulsing, still alive. The voice whispered in his ear, almost tender now. "You have your world back, General. Let it well." Elias gripped the railing, his eyes narrowing. The city shimmered faintly, as if its beauty was only skin deep. Behind the noise of life, he could still hear the rhythm of machinery. And far beyond the mountains, something vast stirred again, waiting. He straightened his coat, looking down at the streets below. A new dawn was rising, but beneath it he felt the same weight, the same silence that had followed him from the battlefield. The peace they had given him was not peace at all. It was the beginning of another design. And somewhere deep inside the earth, the first echo of that voice returned, distant, patient, almost kind. Cycle 7. Initiating. Elias did not move. He only stared into the horizon as the city lights flickered once, then steadied again. The world had reset. The war had ended. But the defiance, the spark that had once broken everything, was still alive inside him. And this time, when it ignited, it would not burn just one world. It would burn them all. The air inside the new world was too clean, too silent. It carried no scent of smoke, no echo of battle, no trace of the countless lives that had once filled the old world. Everything felt rehearsed, too perfect, too measured, as if creation itself was following orders. General Elias Kael stood at the balcony of the council tower, watching the golden city pulse with artificial dawn. Children ran through polished streets. Vendors laughed. Soldiers marched in harmony. But beneath the sound of life, he could hear it again, the faint, mechanical rhythm beneath the earth. It was the heartbeat of the cycle, the same rhythm that had haunted him through every war, every rebellion, every false peace. He turned his eyes toward the mountains in the distance, still flickering faintly with blue veins. They were quieter now, dormant perhaps, yet alive. Watching, waiting. Behind him, the door opened with a whisper of air. A voice spoke softly. "General, the council is ready for your address." Elias turned slowly. The woman who stood there looked exactly like his former lieutenant. Same posture, same steady eyes, but something in her gaze was wrong. Too still, too polished. He nodded and followed her through the corridor. The halls were carved of shining glass and stone, every wall reflecting endless copies of himself. In each reflection, he looked the same, strong, resolute, unwavering. But deep inside, he could feel the cracks widening. They reached the council chamber. The great round room shimmered with a light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. 12 seats stood in a perfect circle, occupied by the same grave figures he had defied years ago. Their faces were calm, their voices synchronized as one. "General Kael," they said in unison, "the new order stands because of your loyalty. The people look to you as their protector. It is time to finalize the doctrine." Elias's jaw tightened. The doctrine, a holographic image flickered to life before him, a sphere representing the world, pulsing with threads of blue light. The same veins that ran through the mountains now spread across the globe, connecting every city, every life. "The doctrine," one of the figures said, "is the preservation of peace through perpetual alignment. Every citizen will live according to the system. No war, no disobedience, no choice." Elias's voice cut through the sterile air. "You call that peace?" The council did not flinch. "We call it order. Without it, humanity consumes itself. You have seen this truth across every cycle." He looked at them, his mind replaying fragments of the past. Every battle, every defiance, every loss. And slowly, it began to dawn on him. This was not his first time standing here. He had been in this room before. He had stood before these same faces, said these same words. Only the world outside had changed. "How many times?" he asked quietly. The figures did not answer. Elias stepped closer, his voice darkening. "How many times have you rebuilt this world? How many times have you erased it? At last one spoke. As many times as it takes. He stared at them, the fire returning to his eyes, the same flame that had defied every command, every false god that tried to claim his obedience. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the pull of something rising again within him. And then, faintly, through the glass walls of the chamber, he heard it, a distant cry, not mechanical. Human. He turned sharply toward the window. Far below, in the heart of the Golden City, a crowd had gathered, men and women, standing still, their faces turned upward. In their hands, they carried banners, handmade, unapproved, marked with a symbol that sent a shiver through him. A single circle, divided by a line, but inverted, the mark of defiance. The council rose in alarm. Contain them. Elias's voice was low, almost a whisper. You cannot contain what you never understood. The room darkened. The holographic sphere flickered, its light stuttering like a dying flame. Then came the sound, the same low hum that had once shaken the earth, returning, stronger this time, deeper. The council panicked. The core is destabilizing. Elias turned toward them slowly. No, it is awakening. The mountain lights outside flared again, brighter, bluer, burning through the clouds. Energy surged through the streets, making the towers tremble. People screamed as the artificial sky cracked open, revealing the cold expanse beyond. The lieutenant grabbed his arm. General, what is happening? He looked at her, not as a soldier, but as something that might not be real. Do you believe in freedom? She hesitated. We already have it. He shook his head. Then you have never seen it. The chamber exploded in light. Every reflection in the glass came alive, each version of Elias moving differently, some shouting, some silent, some walking away. The reflections stepped out of the walls, forming a circle around him. Each carried a piece of his past. One the rifle, one the flag, one the blood-stained coat. The council screamed orders, but their voices fractured, breaking into static. The light from the mountain surged through the tower, and for an instant, Elias saw beyond it all. He saw a world stacked like mirrors, each one a copy of the last, each ruled by a different name, a different false order. In every one, a man like him stood defying it, breaking it, only to awaken another. The cycle was endless. And yet, this time felt different. This time, he remembered, the reflections turned to face him as one, their voices merging with his. If the world cannot be freed, it must be remade. The light consumed everything, the chamber, the council, the city. When it faded, there was nothing but dust and the faint outline of a man standing alone at the edge of creation. Elias Kael looked into the emptiness, his voice steady. No more cycles. But as the silence stretched, a soft whisper rose again from the void. Cycle 8. Initializing. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was standing in a new place, beneath an unfamiliar sun, surrounded by strangers who called him commander. They handed him a new uniform, a new emblem, and from somewhere deep below the earth, the same heartbeat began again. Elias smiled faintly this time, not in defeat, but in understanding, because now he knew what the others never did. Every cycle begins the same way, but it never ends the same way twice. And somewhere beyond the edge of this new world, the mountains were already glowing again. The sky was crimson that evening, painted by fire and sorrow. The new world shimmered below, silent, vast, and waiting. General Elias Kael stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, where the last embers of rebellion still glowed faintly against the dying light. He could taste iron in the air, the same metallic echo that always followed war. But this time, there was no army behind him, no flag, no command to obey, only the weight of his own truth. The wind pressed against his coat, whispering to the torn fabric like a voice calling from another life. He closed his eyes, feeling the faint tremor beneath the ground. The old heartbeat of the system, weaker now, fading. He had done it. The core had been silenced. The world was finally free from the cycle that had enslaved it for centuries. But freedom, he realized, was a fragile thing. It came not with celebration, but with silence. Below him, The survivors gathered. Men and women who had once feared his name now looked to him as the last remnant of something ancient, something human. Their eyes carried both gratitude and fear, as they understood that victory did not guarantee peace. Elias descended slowly, his boots sinking into the ash-coated ground. Children watched him from behind the ruins, clutching small, hand-carved tokens bearing the mark of the circle divided. It had become a symbol of hope, though few truly knew its meaning. A young soldier stepped forward, his uniform torn, his voice trembling. "General, what happens now?" Elias studied him for a long moment. The boy's face was pale, his eyes full of questions that no one should have to ask so young. "What happens now?" Elias said softly. "Depends on whether we can remember." The boy frowned. "Remember what?" "That we are not gods," Elias replied. "That we are not machines. That peace is not built from control, but from choice." He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking behind the glowing mountains. For a moment, the peaks shimmered with blue light again, soft, pulsing, like a dying ember that refused to fade. The system was not entirely gone. Something still lingered beneath. He knew what that meant. The cycle never ended completely. It only slept. But this time, he had left a mark, a scar deep enough that even the architect of eternity would feel it. Night fell. The stars appeared, bright and unfamiliar. He felt their gaze upon him, as though the universe itself was waiting to see what he would do next. Elias removed his gloves, letting the cold wind bite into his skin. He knelt, pressing his bare hand into the soil. It was warm, alive, a faint hum pulsed beneath it, different from the old mechanical rhythm. This one was organic, new. He smiled faintly. Perhaps the world had learned something after all. Behind him, the crowd began to move, gathering the wounded, lighting fires, rebuilding with what little they had. The night was filled with quiet determination, the sound of life beginning again. Elias rose to his feet, his shadow stretching long against the flames. He turned toward the mountains one last time. "You kept your promise," he said under his breath. "Now it is my turn." He began to walk toward them, slowly, deliberately, like a man returning to something unfinished. Each step echoed softly in the stillness, swallowed by the wind and the ashes of history. The stars burned brighter. The hum beneath the ground grew stronger. And somewhere in the darkness, a faint voice whispered, not a command, but of awakening. When Elias reached the edge of the valley, the earth opened before him, revealing a chamber of light deep below. It was the heart of the world, alive, unbound, waiting for a new architect. He stood there for a long time, his face calm, his eyes steady. And then he descended into the light. No one ever saw him again. But the mountains never stopped glowing after that night. Some say he became part of the new world, bound to its core, guiding it from within. Others believe he walked beyond time itself, carrying the memory of all that came before. And every generation that followed told the same story, of the man who defied the world, and, in doing so, remade it.